Simple rhetoric is for simple minds, and the political scene doesn't need any more dumb people in it. The alt-centre are clown world's good guys. They outright reject political fanaticism on account that it ignores the human will to avoid suffering. So they don't fit into boxes neatly enough to be someone else's tools. Well, hello again, Internet. It's Vince and I back with That Was the Week That Was. Hey, Vince, how are you?
G'day, Bob. I'm doing well. I hope you're doing well out there on the internet as well. Things are tough in general, but there are pockets of goodness still.
There are pockets of goodness, and this is one of them. I have some brilliant articles for you this week that you are going to love. And the very first one that we're going to look at, it's called How the WHO Was Captured. And I'm just going to read a bit of it, Vince. Gates, that's Bill Gates, has hijacked the WHO and transformed it into an instrument of personal power that he wields for the cynical purpose of increasing pharmaceutical profits. And then a little while later it says, its main private donor, Bill Gates, who Politico suggested used his clout to control the global COVID response. As one civil society group stated, the WHO effectively outsourced the management of the global COVID vaccine rollout to Gates. Do you think, Vince, that after all this has been said and done, that the WHO is going to survive?
I think the WHO will definitely survive because it's part of the globalist machine, which is what Bill Gates is trying to get control of himself. Anybody interested in this topic should read The Answer by David Icke, because he covers this topic at length, in particular the extent to which the vaccine panic, I'll call it, in response to the COVID pandemic is an important attack strategy used by the globalists, because they know that with something like the COVID pandemic, the response is naturally going to be global. Everyone was rolling out the vaccine from the Pfizer, for example, was rolled out among all Western countries at about the same time. So pandemics, especially global ones, are great opportunities for the globalists to strengthen their control. So the WHO, yes, I think it will survive. It's bound to survive because it's going to be kept in power by the same globalist forces that want to use the WHO to bring us into submission. So as long as the United Nations survives, I think the WHO will also survive, and we won't see an end to such institutions until we see the end of globalism in general.
Vince, I'm going to talk about another potential collapse. On Friday night, there was an announcement that the Silicon Valley Bank had a run on it and was collapsing. Let me read from the article. I'll also leave this one in the comments. As well as being a major blow to the tech industry, the collapse of the SVB has raised concerns about the wider risks facing banks as rapid increases in interest rates hit the bond markets. There are two things that I'd want you to comment on, Vince. Do you think there are a whole other set of banks who have gambled on the interest rates? And what do you think of the ethics of releasing this information on a Friday night?
There are certainly many banks that have gambled on interest rates remaining low. People have to bear in mind that we've pretty much had free money from the perspective of the banks and the major corporates ever since the 2008 financial crisis, when interest rates were dropped to below 1%. It's very easy for the corporates and the banks to get leveraged to the max. In other words, they get as much debt as they can possibly manage. And so when the interest rates go back up, which is something that a lot of people had kind of predicted was never ever going to happen, well, the massively over-leveraged banks can't pay their debts anymore, and they start to go bankrupt, like we've just seen with Silicon Valley Bank. I think it was the 17th biggest bank in America, assets of $200 billion, now wiped out. And a lot of people are saying that this could be the beginning of a 2008 style global financial collapse. As far as the ethics of releasing it on a Friday, I don't think they actually had a choice. I think it's blowing up so fast that I think the establishment has gone into crisis management mode, and they're trying to prevent a contagion or other banks or a general panic among the population, because the mainstream media hasn't really covered this topic as much as you'd expect them to, considering it's so reminiscent of the 2008 collapse. So my guess is that they're trying to keep it quiet for the sake of preventing a panic.
Well, let's hope they do better than they did with the COVID. Another thing that is happening financially, and this is now in New Zealand, is that we have a situation where the decline in property values that we've talked about before is actually gathering pace. In dollar terms, the average dwelling value fell $14,395 last month and has declined by $133,117 over the 12 months to February. The fact that the rate at which housing values are falling is speeding up suggests bigger falls may be coming, and it could be some time before the market finds the floor. Vince, is this good or bad news?
It's definitely terrible news from the perspective of the overall New Zealand economy, because when the Irish property market collapsed by 50% in 2007, they had a lot of economic stagnation resulting from this, and a lot of people going bankrupt. So if it looks like, as is the truth, that the New Zealand property collapse is going to be at least that big, I think we are staring down the barrel of a decade or more of just having to rebuild the economy. But having said that, it could be very good from the perspective of wage earners who wanted to get into a house, because if property prices do collapse 60%, for example, that would mean they would go down to about $400,000, because the peak was slightly over $1 million. So $400,000 is quite reasonable if you're an average wage earner on about $55,000 a year. So I think a lot of people who are in that category will be hoping for a 60-70% fall. But then, of course, the risk becomes that you might lose your job if you're in a job that's precarious, or if your company may have borrowed a large amount of money. So they might be going bankrupt as well. That's going to happen to a lot of people over the next 12 months. So I think it's probably going to be to the benefit of wage earners if they can keep their jobs. Well, that's how it is with most economic things, because the economy doesn't have to be a zero-sum game, but it often is. And that especially is when it comes to whether or not you own land or if you have to rent. So collapsing house prices will definitely benefit a great number of people, but they'll also cause carnage in certain other sectors.
This article is in fact one that I found on your company page, and I really recommend viewers go and have a look at it. It's a good article. It's about Luxon commenting on the gay pride movement this week, I think happened. It said that you say, Vince, observers have noticed that conservative forces have thrown themselves wholeheartedly behind the gay pride movement. This seems like an extraordinary change in attitude, considering that conservatives were for so many years the reason that homosexuality was banned. And then you talk about the divide and conquer strategy, and you mentioned that they don't campaign to prevent any actual injustices, like homelessness, the war on drugs, mental health care, etc. What do you think about Luxon?
I think Luxon is a terrible person, and I think he's going to be extremely bad, not only for New Zealand if he gets in, but also for national, because I think that they were really expecting or kind of hoping for him to be John Key 2.0 in the sense that he'd be really popular. and everyone would think he was going to make them all rich, like they thought John Key was going to make them rich. But then it turned out that he's actually really unlikable and uncharismatic, and perhaps even not even that smart, despite having once been the CEO of Air New Zealand. When it comes to the homosexuality, I think what's really aggravating a lot of people right now is the drag queen story time at the various libraries, because we've seen those started to become protested in America. And I've heard that the drag queen reading tomorrow at the Central Christchurch Library is going to be protested by at least 20 or 30 people. So I think what aggravates me the most is just the shamelessness of the virtue signaling of not only Christopher Luxon, but also the big corporates. And it's noteworthy that they're really just jumping on the bandwagon, because if you look at the Twitter pages of multinational companies, they're not doing the pride thing in the Middle East. Like all of the major multinationals who have replaced their logo with a pride logo on their Twitter pages for Western companies, they keep the original on the Twitter pages for Middle Eastern and African countries. So they don't really care at all about anybody's freedom, whether it's for homosexuality or for anything else. But they're just jumping on the bandwagon. And I think the shamelessness of it is what disgusts a lot of people.
Yes. Yes, that blatant hypocrisy.
Yeah.
Well, we have a very, very, very strange and funny and sad and confusing story. Let me read you the comment first before I tell you the story. Fortunately, what could have been cataclysmic turned out to be perfectly innocent. I hope the kitty in the kettle is feline beta and is free from catastrophe. So, a kitty in a kettle, and the police were called because of strange noises. What a police call out.
I thought that was hilarious. And I thought it was funny thinking about it from the perspective of the people in the house who would have become afraid by somebody banging around outside their window. It would have sounded much like a burglar jumping the fence and trying to find their way out to the house. But then it turned out to be a cat with a teapot on its head.
And it must have been making quite a noise.
Yeah, it would have made a hell of a noise, because my cat sometimes get a box stuck on her head, like a tissue paper box, and she'll twist around and bang everywhere. So I can imagine that a teapot would have made a hell of a racket, especially at night time.
Can you imagine them making the call? We think there's somebody outside. Oh, Vince, well, that was the week that was.
Yep, cheers, Internet. I'll see you next week.
Old centrism is more a matter of wisdom than intelligence. As such, it does not attract followers on the basis of education or ideological fashionability.